Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is on the Pixel 3 XL. I honestly wasn't planning to even pick this phone up, but I do scour eBay occasionally and I found these popping up all over the place. Really cheap, especially in the spares and repairs section. You can find one of these at a starting bid on a couple sellers for 99p here in the UK, which is kind of ridiculous. Been on a couple of these and I won this one. I got it for £33 here in the UK, which is actually pretty good. I used it for about a week and another white Pixel 3 XL was relisted. I thought, heck, I'll bid 15 quid for it as my maximum. We got pretty lucky, so I'm not going to be reviewing both of them. Just the white one. It's got my SIM in it. It's been my main phone since about mid-November. This one set me back £13.50, which is even more ridiculous. I've actually been pretty happy with it. So Pixel 3 XL 2023. Let's get it. So on previous videos, I've usually kicked off with design, so I'll probably just start here again. I love the look of this phone. Straight up, one of my favourite Pixel designs. Probably next to Pixel 2 XL as the best looking Pixel. In my opinion, I think this sort of two-tone glass back is peak Pixel. I don't think any Pixel's topped it since, and for as long as they don't keep doing this two-tone back, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. This whole design package has stacked up surprisingly well actually for a 4-year-old Pixel at that. If you didn't know, Pixels don't have the best track record for longevity, especially on their hardware, yet my 3XL at least is going pretty strong. The aluminium sides of this phone have, as you can see, taken a few dents and bashes here and there, but this sort of thick, plasticky white layer of paint, whatever finish it is, it's worn nicely, and despite not giving me the most confidence in a drop, it does look nice. More importantly, hasn't lost its whiteness like some finishes do, which I was a little bit concerned about. I also want to go back to the back of this phone because I think it's severely underrated. Let me explain. So visually, if you couldn't already tell, I'm a big fan of it, but combine that now with the fact it pretty much deletes fingerprints. It counteracts this sort of soap bar in the shower feeling you get with a welcome bit of grippiness, and the transition from the sides to the back is pretty much as smooth as they come, and it also just happens to become a pretty damn comfy phone to hold as well. That being said, it's still very much a two-handed device, and that's me saying it with, let's be honest, not the smallest pair of hands. The buttons on this phone are just like supremely well placed, clicky, good travel. I love the green power button on this thing as well, it just looks awesome. Oh yeah, and these thin meshes covering the front facing speakers are metal, but have definitely seen better days. They've taken a few dents, and safe to say the earpiece one is very much on the way out. All things considered though, the hardware on show here is a lot better than I expected. I thought this phone would feel kind of cheap and a little bit tacky, and in some areas like the metal sides it does feel a little bit cheap, but it's a much better built phone than I anticipated, so seriously, top job Google. The screen on this phone is actually pretty impressive. It's also pretty controversial because of what surrounds it, but get onto that in a bit. As a panel though, all the numbers are here. Quad HD+, 6.3 inches, 522 ppi, POLED. Pretty importantly, it's made by Samsung, so a little more reassurance that it's at least going to be good. Overall, it's sharp, colour accurate, it's got plenty of pixels, nice and contrasty, you name it. It's a really nice screen. It also gets pretty bright in direct sunlight, or if like me, you live in the UK, it gets as bright as you'll ever need since half the year you can't see the sun anyway. Only nitpick I can think of is honestly the default colour profiles which come with the stock software. They're just super washed out for whatever reason, but to be fair, Pixel Experience on Android 13 has a saturated mode which I've left on since the moment I tried it anyway, and it's way better. Alright, this is probably the part you've been waiting for, which is me to have a gigantic rant about this colossal notch, and it's not the smallest thing in the world, but at the same time it's not actually as bad as you might think. It definitely isn't the be-all and end-all of this phone. In fact, even next to an iPhone 13 for reference, which is a couple years newer and dare I say has a compact notch, there's not much in it. Okay, I'll stop. That being said, Does it need to be this big? I mean, it's only got to hold, what, 2 cameras, the earpiece, and an ambient light sensor, which probably could have been shifted up a little bit, so theoretically, no. But it only really gets irritating when you're watching videos because it cuts off, admittedly, a pretty big chunk of anything that's widescreen. And if it's shot in a really wide aspect ratio, then chances are you'll miss out on whatever's there entirely. And there's also a pretty sizable chin down here, so videos won't quite look like they're centered, even if they are. And finally, since it's my review, this pretty noticeable crack across the screen hasn't really changed how I use the phone. It's a bit irritating, it distorts the clock, but that's about it. So, great screen, kind of funky screen experience. So, I might as well go over performance, which has been quite up and down with this phone. When I first got it, I put it on an Android 13 Pixel Experience Plus ROM, and the November patch was horrible. It genuinely had some of the worst performance I think I've ever had in any phone. Just slow, choppy, and the Pixel launcher for some reason was always freezing up, like it would just drop frames constantly. It was an easy fix, you could just force stop it and it would go back to normal, but it was also just getting really annoying, and this phone just felt sluggish. On the upside to this though, the Android 13 January patch was absolutely crazy. This phone's quick now, like it completely flipped it. There's no more of the Pixel launcher lag, there's no more issues with animations, it's a lot smoother, app switching's better, but overall the phone just feels faster and it feels like you can lean on it a little bit more with power now than before, where it was literally just a 1 or a 2 app phone. Sadly though, the one thing that never seems to improve here is the RAM management. Safe to say, I was expecting it to suck, but it still managed to outsuck my expectations. It's abnormally bad. 4 gigs of RAM on this phone is not enough. It's definitely not enough in 2023. There are phones out now with 6, 8, 12, 18 gigs of RAM. This phone will consistently be taking up 3.2 gigs of system alone, which is already 80% of its RAM just to run the phone, and 800 megabytes of remaining RAM is not exactly great. I don't even know how this is still such a big issue. Like, yes, it is down to the lack of physical RAM here, and Android 13 won't be doing it any favours, let's be honest, but my original Pixel, which also has 4 gigs of RAM, doesn't have these issues. And after all the time Google's had to try and somewhat improve it, yeah, this phone just straight up doesn't hold apps. It sucks. Taking a quick look at this software, Pixel Experience Plus on Android 13 has been solid, and being a custom ROM, there's always a little bit more to tweak here than what Google's own builds would offer, although it's also closer to stock than most other skins I've used, so it's not the most abundant on extra features, but it does keep all the out-the-box software goodies that you would get on the Pixel 3. For instance, you've got Squeeze for Assistant. I'll confess, it works just fine, but I don't use the assistant a whole lot personally, so I've kept it on, but I rarely trigger it. But something I do love here, which I've left on for a few weeks, is the Now Playing feature, which is excellent. It's just super fast at recognizing songs. It runs off both Wi-Fi and mobile data, and it can pick up faint music from pretty much anywhere, even with a ton of background noise, so bottom line is, it works a treat. It also keeps a neat little rolling history on the phone of all the songs it picked up and the times that it picked those up. Another neat feature here is the face unlock. It's obviously just using the RGB cameras, so it's far from secure, but it works pretty well. That is to say, it falls apart, it struggles a little bit in anything less than medium light, but in good light, it only takes a couple seconds to unlock the phone, and it even works upside down, if you're into that. Let's also talk about this fingerprint reader on the 3XL. The one on the black phone, in the couple weeks I used it, works fine, not much to pick up on. It's recessed below the glass just enough that you can feel for it. It's fast, it's in a comfy spot on the back of the phone. That's about it. It's rock solid. The speakers on the 3XL are definitely a bit of a mixed bag. I was expecting them to be pretty good, and they just are pretty good. They don't get crazy loud enough to fill a room, anything like that, but they have a good amount of bass. And especially if you hit that musical sweet spot where the bass sort of resonates, then they sound even better. On the downside, they do distort quite a lot. Once you get above maybe 80% volume, they don't have the most clarity in the high end that I've ever heard. Something else I picked up on was this kind of odd phenomenon on the last few notches of volume, where they seem to sound a lot more spacey a bit sort of echoey. I don't know, it's a weird one. The haptics on this phone though are straight up the best I've ever used. The vibrations are tight and they almost give you that button press sensation, which is, for me anyway, the sign of a really good vibration motor. It's just really satisfying, and luckily as well, the software here takes advantage of this, so you'll get a bit of the feedback subtly snuck in here and there for stuff like the keyboard, the recent apps screen, the notification tiles, and my personal favourite is the clock wheel when you set an alarm. The battery life on this phone is, I mean, it has a battery. It definitely has a battery, but this phone is not going to be winning any awards for battery life at all. There's not really much you can expect from a 4-year-old phone, especially the Pixel 3 XL, which never had good battery life. I've been getting maybe 3.5 hours screen on time tops on a light day. The standby time is decent. The Snapdragon 845 seems pretty good at idle apps, so it might hold onto battery decently well. You can top it up pretty quickly, and there is wireless charging here, but bottom line, don't buy this phone for the battery life. It's not going to impress you. Alright then, last piece of the puzzle, let's talk about these cameras. Round the back, there's your very much solo 12.2 megapixel IMX363, aka the same sensor as pretty much every Pixel up to the 6A, paired here with an aperture of f1.8. So from the 700-ish photos and videos I've got out of this camera over the last few months, I think I can sum it up pretty well. It's still an impressive camera in some key areas, but it's also definitely shown its age in a couple other ones. Let's go over the good parts. Firstly, the 3XL takes really pleasing looking photos, like the sort of photos I typically go straight to posting instead of opening Snapseed and giving them a quick edit. And I've been pretty much always getting a nice amount of sharpness and detail. There's an extra bit of sharpening sprinkled on top in post, but I personally kind of like it. I'm also seeing really strong dynamic range, sometimes a little too aggressive, and it boosts the shadows a lot, but particularly where I've shot sunsets and nightscapes, it kicks out some impressive end results. It's also very good with white balance and color accuracy, and the saturation more time is spot on, if not a little muted for my taste. And then the zoom here is obviously digital, there's no telephoto here, and it's impressive, but I don't use it a whole lot past 2 or 3x, just because it ends up looking kind of mushy. I've also played around with night sight and astrophotography as well, and they work great here. The longer you leave the night sight to capture, the cleaner the output gets, and the brighter the scene becomes. And in handheld, the night shots are brighter, but you do pick up quite a lot of noise in the process. When the astrophotography mode kicks in and you leave it for up to a minute, the results are amazing, even with this sensor. Finding conditions and a spot stable enough to trigger it is a bit frustrating, especially if you don't have a dedicated tripod to just whip out like most people, but hey, when it works, it works. Okay, let's talk downsides. The biggest and most obvious one is just the hardware on show here. Using this camera feels like a constant battle between this archaic sensor and this kick-ass software that's trying to make up for it, and a lot of the time it works great, but it's definitely still a tiny, outdated sensor. And the biggest giveaway for this is noise, and I mean a ton of noise. In anything less than bright lighting, you're gonna see noise in these pictures. It kind of shocked me how much there actually was. It's almost a trend with this camera, but often I'll take a shot, I'll be wowed with how it turned out, and then I'll crop in, and behold, it's a grainy mess. Also, a lot of the time, nearby light sources come out looking hazy, and sometimes leave this weird pattern across the image, so you gotta retake it, which is a bit annoying. Up in the notch, you get dual-wielding 8 megapixel IMX355 selfie shooters, also at f1.8. One of them is a standard focal length, and the fun one is a 0.7x 97 degree wide angle. I've probably shot near enough 90% of my selfies on this wide angle, and it is a really fun camera. Despite only being 8 megapixels as well, it's surprisingly sharp, and it keeps up pretty damn well in low light. It's pretty much the same story as the rear camera. Great HDR, great colours, white balance, skin tones, detail, and when you're switching between the lenses, it's also pretty consistent as well. Then again, it also suffers from a ton of noise like the rear camera, but the light flaring issue doesn't seem as bad. The video on both the main and selfie cameras is decent. It gets up to 4K at 30 FPS on the rear. The stabilization is okay, but still a little bit shaky. The video profile is very flat looking. It lacks a bit of contrast, which does, to be fair, help it look a bit more balanced, and it keeps the highlights better exposed. It's also pretty sharp, to give it credit. But there's, once again, a lot of noise, thanks to these being older sensors. Oh yeah, and the microphones are not amazing, but not too bad either. Finally as well, the camera app performance has been quite meh. There's a bit of delay when capturing photos, but 9 times out of 10 it's fine. It is though an absolute memory hog. It ends up usually killing off a bunch of other background apps, especially Spotify, even if you just have the camera app open, which has driven me a bit mad, I'll be honest. It gets frustrating. How do I sum up this phone in 2023? It's difficult because this phone's definitely got a lot going for it, and especially at this price, which is the main selling point, obviously. This phone, though, could actually be one of the better 2018 flagships, pre-owned, if you're willing to go down that route. It's got a very admirable camera, it's got a solid screen, small country size notched, and other things like wireless charging, which you may actually struggle to find on cheaper, newer phones, but it's just a question of whether you're willing to deal with slower performance than obviously modern chips. 4 gigs of RAM on this phone is definitely not enough. That is the biggest drawback of this phone if I was to recommend it. If you want a concrete answer from me, I'd say go for it. If you can put a custom ROM on it, Android 13 will run butter smooth, and I mean that. It's a lot better than Android 12 was. And in that case, thanks for watching. Please comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.